This week's parasha is Parshat Tazria. At the beginning of the parasha, we're told of a woman giving birth to a male child, and then there's a mitzvah, Uvayom hashmini mol besar orlato. On the 8th day, his foreskin is to be circumcised. So this is the mitzvah in the Torah of bris milah. There are many, many different things that the sages learned from this verse at the beginning of the parasha. One of them is that Brit Milah is docha Shabbat. Since it says Uvayom hashmini, on the 8th day he is to be circumcised, that means the 8th day from his birth. If a child is born on Shabbat, the 8th day is the following Shabbat. So we learn from this that Brit Milah supersedes Shabbat, because to circumcise a child involves doing something which otherwise would be forbidden, one of the acts of work that is forbidden on Shabbat. So we learn that Brit Milah is docha Shabbat. In the continuation of the parasha, the Torah discusses all of the laws that pertain to the disease of leprosy, of tzarat. Chazal learn also that there's another thing that Brit Milah supersedes, is doche, which is leprosy. If on that limb of the circumcision, of the bris, there is a sign of leprosy, then in another context it's totally forbidden to cut off the sign of leprosy. But in order to perform the mitzvah of Brit Milah, not only is it permissible, but we're commanded to cut it away. What is the difference between these two laws? One is that Brit Milah is doche Shabbat, and the other is that Brit Milah is doche tzarat, leprosy. In regard to Shabbat, of course, it's only if this is the 8th day. If it's not exactly the 8th day from the birth, if for some reason it was impossible to perform the circumcision on the 8th day, and now the circumcision is being performed on another day, then it cannot be on Shabbat. Only Brit Milah bizmana. If it's in its proper time, it's doche Shabbat, otherwise not. As far as tzarat is concerned, it doesn't matter what time it is. Bein bizmana, bein shelo bizmana, whether it's on the 8th day or whether it's on another day, Brit Milah is always above the forbidden cutting off of a sign of leprosy. What do we learn from this in spirituality, in our souls? Shabbat is the pleasure, the divine pleasure of the Nefesh HaElokit, of the Jewish soul, the divine soul. Disease versus being well has to do with the power of will, which is the origin of the blood in the body, and the blood of the soul. The blood relates intrinsically to the soul. Adam hu hanefesh. The blood is even equated to the soul. And the power of the blood to flow, and for a person, for the body to be well, and for the soul also to function properly, to be well, that is the origin of that is in the will. It's also a super-rational power of the soul. Just like pleasure is super-rational, so is will. To cut off a sign of leprosy that otherwise would be forbidden means that there's something about Brit Milah that it cuts off disease. Meaning that if a person throughout all of his life, he guards his covenant. What is Brit Milah? It's the covenant in the flesh that we have with HaKadosh Baruch, with God. That guarding of the covenant, that is a way to prevent or to cut off disease, which means to correct one's power of will. The fact that Brit Milah is above and supersedes even Shabbat, meaning that it derives ultimately from a power in the soul which is above pleasure. What is the only power in the soul that is above the divine pleasure? It's simple, pure faith, which motivates one to be ready always to give up his life for Hashem. It's called Mesirut Nefesh, self-sacrifice. So the fact that Brit Milah represents, on the 8th day when a child is circumcised, something is implanted deep in his unconscious of his soul, that he is a Jew, and he is ready always to sacrifice himself for Hashem. That is above even Shabbat. There's another thing which pushes away Shabbat, which supersedes Shabbat. It's pikuach nefesh. If I have to save a life of a person in danger, I can also disregard all of the forbidden activities on Shabbat and do everything necessary in order to save a life. That's pikuach nefesh. So actually there are two things that are doche Shabbat, that push away Shabbat, meaning that they supersede Shabbat. Circumcision and pikuach nefesh, and saving a life. What is the relation? The fact that a Jew has in his essence the readiness to sacrifice himself, that itself is pikuach nefesh, is for the sake of saving the Jewish people. The Jewish people exist as a unity, as a collective unity, in virtue of the fact that every Jew is willing to sacrifice his life for God, for the Torah, for the Jew, for his people. In a certain way, it says that Brit Milah is actually preparing a young boy, a child, in the future of his life to be a soldier, to be a chayal, to be a warrior for Hashem when necessary, which is obviously a state of continual readiness to sacrifice himself. So we see that the origin of Brit Milah is in the highest crown of the crown in Kabbalah, the superconscious. It has three levels to it. The highest level is pure and simple faith, which motivates self-sacrifice. Then comes the second level of the crown, which is the pleasure principle, the divine pleasure principle. That's Shabbat. And then the third, which is divine will to perform Hashem's will in all of the commandments of the Torah. And once more, the will has to do with the flow, the healthy flow of the blood, which prevents disease. So if we keep our covenant strong and guard the covenant, we achieve, from the highest level, we achieve the ultimate pleasure and the ultimate will. And we perfect, when the crown is perfected, it says in the Zohar, if the crown is perfected, all of us, all the powers of the soul are perfected. So may we merit, especially this week, that the Torah reading begins with circumcision, to circumcise ourselves. The Torah says we have to first circumcise our hearts. There's also a foreskin on the heart. So may we all be able to circumcise ourselves and to serve Hashem with joy.